Welcome, everyone. Today we are joined by Krista. How are you, Krista?
Hello, Gabby. I'm well. Thanks for having me.
You are so welcome. I've been so looking forward to talking to Krista. She's an incredible survivor of SRA, of MK Ultra, of trafficking, and grew up in a generational family. And I've connected with Krista over several months now, and I'm so proud of her for speaking out. She's set up her own platforms where she's sharing really amazing information for survivors. And I caught a recent one, which was about handling. And I was like, oh, this is so pertinent to all survivors, because it's something that, I'm contacted about quite regularly from survivors. It could be that they're being handled by a family member that's still cult loyal, a psychologist, someone that's appeared in the workplace. There's so many ways these people can come into us and come into our lives. And it was just incredible seeing Krista's perspective. I think having survivors share what they've experienced with handling and solutions was just incredible. So we're going to have a chat today about handling, and we're going to have a chat about some of Krista's story as well. Krista is heavily targeted, and that's why we're protecting her face today. And yeah, I just wanted to welcome you on, Krista. And I know part of your story is really how you were quite caught up in the new age, as so many of us survivors have been, and a lot of survivors have been programmed very much to fall into the new age, and for that to take us away from various healing that is possible through coming back to God and finding ourselves. And Krista was quite caught up in the new age. She was experiencing some weird spiritual phenomenon. She was learning about some different spiritual techniques and really found some strange things going on. And when she went to action those and start praying and saving herself from those things, it was only once she come back to God and the Holy Spirit that all of her memories come through. And I find that such an incredible story, because I know that was very much my journey as well. And I speak to so many survivors that once they find the truth of Jesus and start coming back to that goodness, which we've been so programmed against in many cases, both by our abuse and by MK Ultra, the learning, the healing is just goes through the roof. It just is so exponential. So I'd love you to share some of your incredible story, Krista, about how you got caught up in the new age, as so many of us survivors have, and how you were able to remove yourself from that and the healing that was possible.
Yes, great. So I was caught up in the new age for probably 3 decades, probably roughly 30 years. And I believe it's a normal thing to be drawn to it if you have a family from an occultic practice like Freemasonry, which at minimum, my paternal grandfather was involved in. So I was drawn to the Egyptian stuff as in my teenage years to early 20s. And oh my goodness, I got involved in so many forms of New Age practice, everything from doing clairvoyant readings and hands-on healing to Hindu philosophies. I mean, the list, I'll leave it there. The list is long,
There's so
but
much of, just what we would consider normal, regular life is the new age.
yeah.
There's astrology everywhere. There's crystals everywhere. We just don't even realize we're so brainwashed.
That's right. That's right. And I'll back up. As a child, I was exposed to a Christian church, but because my mother fell away, I fell away also. I was preteen, going to a Calvary Chapel church in Southern California when a pastor, Chuck Smith, was still alive, and I found an old photograph of him with a Freemason hat, but that's a separate story for another day. But uh, I fell out of the church and was in the New Age. And the last practice that I was studying, in addition to working my corporate career, in 2020, I was doing something called spiritual response therapy, and I was working with a pendulum. to get holding it over charts to get answers for people's health. I really believed like I was going to do some good in the world. I was going to help people with their trauma through clearing their soul records, because it's information you're supposed to be able to access the so-called Akashic records. And I really believed I was going to help people clear them of trauma, of family issues, loved ones. I really believe I was going to do some good. So over time, over the course of maybe 6 to 9 months, holding the pendulum, my arms started like hurting, and I had this weird swirl of energy around my head. And I just didn't know. I lived from a life of believing that like I need to live from high integrity, but all those spiritual practices I didn't know were an abomination to God. Divination is an abomination, and I had been doing all these things. So I started praying this really simple prayer that I heard someone mention, like, God, please bless me so I can find a different way. And I was also saying, like, please hold my hand. Like, I feel so terrible. And then I found New Age Jesus testimonials, and I heard a voice say, watch those. So 2 days later, I did. And I got delivered in my own living room by myself.
Wow,
And
what a
yeah.
turnaround.
Yeah, and all the pain went away in my arms from holding the pendulum. The swirl around my head, I believe, was demonic, heavy demonic attacks and energy, affliction, just so much. So I, being sensitive and kind of wide open still, I really just like wanted to be obedient to God. I was like, I threw everything in the garbage. I wanted to shut down my intuitive abilities, but Holy Spirit led me to a pastor who's since passed away named Derek Prince, and I quickly found his generational curses and trauma. And I learned spiritual warfare, and I broke off a lot of things, but I knew there was still more to do. And it wasn't until getting saved that like I started having these horrific nightmares of um people would say it was a spiritual spouse. I personally believe it was being raped as a child. But I sought deliverance for that. And everything just started unraveling. It was just all God, just unraveling and bringing back slowly, gently bringing back memories.
Wow. Just incredible, Krista. It's just, I think survivors, probably because we have been manipulated by, forces of black magic, etc., are often so sensitive to energies. And you can really see how it's so easy for us to fall into the new age, because it is shown as being, all love and light. It's got all the answers in the world. It's so feel good. It's all bright and shiny. And then I think it's so important to hear testimonials like yourself, where you saw the darker side of this, of the way it was affecting your life. You started, having these spiritual experiences of things that aren't great around you. And even divination and visiting a psychic, having your cards read, etc., is so accepted in society now. Whereas decades ago, I know, the older, like my partner's grandmother, etc., she would just be like, that's evil, don't go near it, etc. But we've just come to really accept that. And so many people are working with angels, for example, in their healing and their readings, but they're not with God, they're not with Jesus. So I think the question really has to be, what angels are they working with? And you've really had that first-hand experiences of those demonics coming in through the new age. So just wow.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. That's a really great summary of just how damaging the new age can be. And, as scripture says, my people perish for lack of knowledge. Like I had no idea. I really believed that some of this was really good and it was normal and it was mainstream. It wasn't mainstream when I got into it in the early 90s, but it certainly became so, and that felt kind of validating in some way, like it was somehow okay.
For sure. And you were there to help people. You were learning techniques that you thought would be so helpful to other people and to yourself. And
Yes.
it turned out to be completely the opposite. And how interesting that through, that need of needing to clear this bad energy from your life, once you did that, you actually uncovered your own history of, SRA and MK Ultra and being trafficked, like that would have been a real shock, I'm sure, as well.
Oh, yes. The first stage, and I know other teachers talk about this, and you probably talked about in your show as well, Gabby, but the first stage is denial, right? The
Mm.
first, and man, was that denial heavy, because I'm in my 50s. And not to say that wouldn't happen to someone in their 20s or 30s, but I've been in it for many, many years. And my family and other people around me, certain members, have put on a really great facade. And I kind of bought into the culture, our world, and the life that I've been living. And when everything is a lie, it's so painful. But fortunately, we have God, and fortunately, the denial didn't last for long, because Holy Spirit reminded me of things like, remember when family members got married, at a cemetery chapel, and, you remember this, you remember that. I'm like, oh yeah, of course I remember these things. So I was getting these little reminders of things that, happened, that weren't super traumatizing, but were strange things about the environment that I grew up in and the things that people did. So, yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? Like, I find that often too, is you'll get, a deeper memory that's completely shocking, perhaps around a trauma or an event that you had absolutely no recollection of whatsoever, completely behind an amnesiac barrier from the programming and trauma. But then once you get through the shock and the denial and start accepting, okay, that is a memory, it's interesting because it actually starts connecting to a lot of other memories. And that's, a way that I've used in my own healing to move through that stage of denial and shock quicker, is just actually going through and feeling out what other memories this trauma that's just come up connects to, because often there's things that you just haven't thought about for like decades. There's conversations that you've had with relatives or past partners, etc., and it directly connects to the memory that you've had, but because that wasn't there, it also got suppressed, even though it wasn't completely locked out as well. So that's really interesting how you shared that as well. I would love to hear a bit about what your family was like, what areas you grew up in, etc., so other survivors listening can connect to your story, and yeah, just the things that you noticed perhaps that were unusual in your
Yeah.
family as well, that might be signs, because I know you mentioned that you had obviously the Freemasonic influence in your family too.
Yes. Okay, great. So, I was born in California, outside of Los Angeles. I'm the firstborn of three kids, and I spent the bulk of my life on the coast between Los Angeles and San Diego. But before we moved to the coast, we moved from LA to Palm Springs. And when my parents were still married, and my father was a landscape architect, and he landscaped homes for everyday people and also for celebrities, because there were a lot of celebrities who lived part-time in Palm Springs. And my father worked and did work for people like Bob Hope and Ally McGraw and Steve McQueen. So there was access to these individuals. I have huge swaths of amnesia, and I thought it was a normal thing, for people to have amnesia in their childhood. So I just want to preface it with that, because I do remember some things from Palm Springs, even though we left I was around 6 or 7 years old. But Palm Springs is one of the last places my parents lived together before they separated and got divorced. I remember in Palm Springs, a neighbor friend, a young girl, a blonde, sweet blonde girl who lived in a house behind me. She either went missing or she moved out. I don't know, but I remember watching men excavate dirt, like fill in a big, like swimming pool sized hole in the backyard, and she was gone. I remember watching them and feeling sad and not knowing what happened to her. And I remember my father and grandfather taking me on a hike, and they sexually molested me. So those are just a few members in Palm Springs. Now, my family's background, my mother's parents were from the South in the US. And my grandfather was the youngest of 12. He grew up on a plantation. The family was at one time, one member was a governor of their state in the 1800s. And once upon a time, they were like the major landowner of that state. And that maternal grandmother, that maternal grandfather rather, he kind of had a wild upbringing. They lost everything, including their house burned down. He ended up serving in the US military. He taught artillery in the 1940s in California. But this grandfather would say that my family was blue bloods. And as a kid, I was sort of fascinated by it because my family was blue collar. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. But later on in life, I really didn't care. It wasn't, but we have a genealogy book. Some paid researcher in the 1970s did research on this family that's gone missing. Someone has a copy. My father's side is also working class. My paternal grandfather was also worked with plants in a nursery, and he was one that had a Masonic ring. And I used to ask him about it because his name was George and has a G on the ring, as many people know. And the odd thing is both grandparents and my father are all named George. And that's a very
common, isn't it, in these families, passing it down.
Yeah. So on that side of the family, that I still carry their last name. It's a bloodline name. So that's why I'm wish not to disclose my last name. I really don't care about the bloodline. I know that I'm bought and purchased by the blood of Jesus, but people care. Some people seem to care. And so I just discovered this information about a year ago, and I just, I want that confidentiality. But so I just want to say,
really, you were, I know you've mentioned this when we've chatted privately, you weren't unaware that you were a bloodline descending from a bloodline family until quite recently when you were researching. I know you started remembering in like 2021. So that would have been like a real shock as well, right? To be seeing your family name.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah, I just learned literally like April of 2022 when I found a particular researcher's website and the name. There are lots of shocks, for survivors, and it just seems like, they're just sort of one after the other. It's felt like for the first year or so of getting saved, giving my life to God. The interesting thing about my family's last name, my father's last name, on that side of the family, there were 2 suicides. 2 men committed suicide or alleged suicides. Hopefully that wasn't, murder. I don't know. They called them suicides. And then there was an attempted suicide, a third person. My grandfather's sister attempted it one time, and she lived. And so that's interesting that it's on the one side of the family.
And we know that, suicides can be quite a, I guess, symptom of, what the trauma that has been inflicted on these people within generational families. And then, like you said, was it a suicide, etc. as well? We'll never know. So interesting.
So that's a bit about my family history. Now, in terms of boyfriends, I haven't married, nor had kids, but there was one prominent boyfriend that I believe was approved by, the cult, I like to say. When you're in a bloodline family, you have approved people. And there was this one individual, I'll call him JR. He was approved by the family, and I broke it off. And I couldn't understand at the time in my early 20s why my family was so angry with me.
Wow.
They were furious.
Wow.
And so he didn't have a famous name to my knowledge, not that it matters, but my sister kind of around the same time was dating a Russell. which is on that list of the 13 bloodline names. So they did not marry. I think maybe she also angered the family. I don't know. But yeah, I find that really interesting that we both, there were people that were definitely appointed to us. And I won't speak for my third sibling and his situation, but yeah. So
definitely seems to be the way, because with these families being cult bloodlines, they don't want to dilute, I guess, what they consider their power, their resource, their blood. So they definitely want to always promote relationships to another family, preferably another powerful family. So it's an important part, I think, an important consideration for survivors that are remembering. Sometimes it's very easy to be like, oh, it was one side of the family that was, really evil. And quite often, or I would say almost always, it's actually very much like the Satanists and the Luciferians. You have one side of the family that is very out there and very obviously evil. The other side of the family is very, very, very likely to be a generational cult family as well, because they wouldn't want to set up a relationship for their children with another family. They wouldn't want their bloodline to be diluted, and that can come back to obviously the children. They want them to be as programmable as possible, and that only happens when they have as much generational trauma coming from both sides too. So yeah, really interesting. And would you say that, so I know we were going to start talking about the handling aspect of your experiences as well, would you say that this person was a handler or was sent in that manner, Krista? Or
yes, I would. I mean, I think the plan was to get married, but I would call him a handler as well. The things that he would do and say, one of the things that he did that other men have done is they will try to say and be very agreeable that they like the same things that I like. They will do some research on you, so they might have that music, at the time when CDs were big, right? Things hadn't gone digital. They would have some of the same things. They would they would try to be as agreeable as possible in the beginning. This individual, I have to say, though, was of an Irish Spanish background, and that Irish blood and that Druidic background was really strong on both my family's side and his side. And he was some sort of warlock. I mean, whether he knew it or not, he literally tracked me down on a train, underground train, before cell phones.
wow.
He tracked me down. He came up to me laughing. It was quite unusual and
Very
kind of
unnerving.
yeah. And he did not live where I lived at the time. He lived in Southern California, and I moved to the north. So he was in my territory, so to speak, and tracked me down. He would stalk me in dreams. He wasn't willing to really let go of whatever soul ties or agreements we had. That's a completely different level of handling that I hadn't experienced with anyone else. The bond that I guess was created as a result of sleeping with someone. Yeah.
Wow. And it's such an important thing to consider as well, is, a lot of these handlers are themselves coming from generational families. So they can very well have alters, or it might even be in their conscious parts that, they have access to these tools of black magic, to various ways to connect in the astral. So handling can take place in so many different ways. And I know you've experienced pretty much all of them, Krista, during your lifetime, being very targeted. And it can be physical, it can be handlers, like you said, appearing in places that you wouldn't expect them, coming into a workplace, into your home environment, into friends and family areas. Or it can be even now it can be quite technology based, so using a lot of frequency, cars, helicopters, planes. A lot of the survivors I'm speaking to currently, they're noticing handling attempts because they are healing. A very important part of healing is they're starting to put up boundaries with cult active family members, with people around them that they intuitively know they're not safe around. And the cults don't like that. So, it becomes very much a retaliation where they're sending in these people to attempt to reprogram survivors, attempting to silence them, and attempting, I guess, to regain control over their minds and their lives. So I'd love for you to share, just so people viewing can maybe get an idea of what a handling attempt might be like, and be able to reflect on, potentially how that has either happened in their life, or there might be people around them at the moment that are attempting to do so while they heal.
Yeah, so one thing I've noticed by a recent attempt is the man moved way too quickly. And he got access to my phone number and I didn't give it to him. And he messaged me, and the DM exchange went from, let's go out to happy hour to, when do you go to sleep at night and what sign are you? And I can tell we get along really well, and just kind of making some assumptions, maybe that I really wanted a relationship, or that because we hit it off and had a great conversation, he could just get really comfortable with me really quickly. I honestly, Gabbi, I don't think they're that sophisticated. They're not smooth enough. They really aren't. If you're a survivor with some discernment and you have the power of the Holy Spirit's discernment, it's so easy to read between the lines, that they're not who they seem to be.
Yeah, and I guess that's our survivor hypervigilance, being so aware of everything going on around us, often can really help pick up that there's something not quite right going on here.
Yeah. So I'd say they move too quickly. Some of them are cigarette smokers. I don't really think cigarette smoking is as big anymore, but what I've encountered with the cigarette smokers is smoke being used, not only to sometimes be laced with drugs for programming, but to create amnesic walls or smoke screens between parts. So this guy that went too fast recently, he was a smoker. He was working on my property, as an agent on site at my property. He would just happen to be outside having a cigarette whenever I was out. They just kind of conveniently place themselves in front of you at the right time, if it's in the workplace or where you live. But I just want to say that. And then my experience was also that they can kind of keep odd hours at night. Like one boyfriend who was a handler, would work during the day and then record music at night. He didn't have a bank account, or claim not to. And they claim to like the things that you like, I like the same music or movies or food as you do. I had one guy I mentioned when I was listening to secular music about the band Queen, and he showed up to take me out to lunch, and we got into his car. He had Queen blaring, and he was singing along to it in a way that was just like an actor trying so hard. And let's face it, these individuals aren't actors. And so I would say, if someone's going on dating apps to really, just say point blank, hey, I saw the movie Tinder Swindler on Netflix. I'd like to connect with you online, for safety. If they're not willing to do that, I would be concerned. Or if they're completely off social media, I'm also concerned by that.
Do your homework, do a background check, right?
Yes. Look them up everywhere. LinkedIn, reverse phone number checks.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those services are free, or you can do a reverse check for, $1 just to check on someone's name, who is registered to and where. Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, like look at what they say, look at their history. We have so much access, so many tools now to really research someone without, spending, buying, purchasing like that, or soliciting the help of a private investigator.
Private detective, that's right. We can do some online stalking, so to speak, to check someone out quite easily.
Yeah, so we should do that. We should definitely do that. And then pray. You mentioned, Gabbi, like creating boundaries. Is one aspect that you wanted to talk about. And I would say, like, I always start in safe places. Like I always meet someone during the day, never at night in the beginning, and not in isolating places like a random park that's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. I always drive myself. I don't let them pick me up.
Such a good idea.
And then pray, pray for the spirit of discernment. For me, if I feel slightly dizzy or have vertigo symptoms in someone's presence, or when they contact me, I could be being triggered by them intentionally or unintentionally. I notice I'll get those vertigo symptoms on occasion.
It's so important to be, aware of your body responses, because I think it's quite incredible what our bodies can tell us when we listen, in terms of just interacting with a person, or when you're just starting to message them, like what's your actual body reaction. And I think there's so much there, especially for survivors that are very sensitive to energies. Always be aware of exactly what the way in which your body's reacting as well.
Completely. The other thing is, are there messages when they DM you, is the phrasing of their words weird? Is it off? Because as you know, there are trigger words in a lot of the programming that survivors have been through, right? Like one therapist in introductory session said all kinds of weird trigger words, like, and if someone's triggered by words, you could just pause for 10 seconds by like kitty cat, Rubicon, don't go nuclear. Like there's some really weird trigger words and you can find them online. But are they saying odd things in their messages that just feel a little bit off to you? Then I would research a phrase and some of the keywords if you feel safe and healed enough to go do the research on what Cisco Wheeler and Fritz Springmeier wrote together about some of those things. It's worth looking into because they'll use keywords all the time.
Definitely. And I think a big key to identifying someone using trigger words is, unfortunately, because the programming's been so intense and it's so sophisticated, almost every word that's used commonly can be a trigger word. But in a conversation or a message, like if a person is consistently using the same words, repeating them, you've got to start questioning, like, why are they using these phrases? Like, why is it standing out to you as well? So I think that's a really important observation. Krista, is just, are there certain things that are being repeated? Are there things that your body's reacting to or are just not feeling right? Because usually with a trigger, they're going to try and, often it's done in groups of 3. So it could be like a hand sign and a couple of vocal words, a few vocal words, a tone. So it's like, are there series of, communication that just don't seem right, or that you're noticing a body reaction afterwards? And I think, being aware of, after you've interacted with this person, what state of mind are you in? Are you feeling calm and centered? And are you feeling more yourself? Or are you feeling spaced out? Have you dissociated? Are you feeling out of your body or just, in an unusual mental state? So it's a really important way that we can just monitor ourselves and check in, how are we reacting to a person, like with our mind, our body, our emotions, and our spirit.
Right. Yes. What you shared made me think of another example of a female friend whom I'm not sure, what's going on with this person, but they shared a person who's a Christian who shared a random video of a large like mountain lion flying in the air to the Van Halen song Jump. And I believe the code to jump is either suicide or a gang rape situation can mean a couple things. And I was sort of, I said, wow, like, I don't even know why you sent this to me. And she deleted it. But look at the kind of content the person is sharing with you, because that can give you some clue as well.
So true. And, these handlers can come into your life under many different pretenses. So it could be, that I guess the cults look at, what is lacking in your life, like what is a door that they might be able to open easily. So quite often they'll come in under the pretense of a partner. We all know the dating sites are heavily used by intelligence and the cults to connect, to get into survivors' lives and target them. They could come in as a friend. I've had a lot of survivors recently receive harassment over social media. And it's unusual harassment because it's not the normal, like, just all out being horrible and attacking them. It's actually people pretending to be a friend, come into their lives and pretend to be really understanding and completely love bomb them. And then it changes. So it's important to know there's different ways that the cults will use. And, a lot of survivors have, experienced, extreme isolation during their healing process. They've had to put up boundaries with family, and it can be quite a lonely time as you're healing, because you're letting go of this life that, even though it was a lie, it was all that you knew. So these handlers are very, very adept at coming in and playing the best friends and, creating space in your life because they're offering you this great friendship. And it's great if you have new people entering your life, but I think it's really important to just be weighing up, do you feel positive after these interactions? Is this person taking you off of like what your plans were to do originally? What kind of words are sticking out? Are there any negatives that are coming up early in the relationship, or does it suddenly change from being great to, when you disagree or something, doesn't sound right and you raise it, does this person become really attacking and narcissistic? And, that's an easy way that I've learned to identify people that are coming into our community causing trouble or harassing survivors or harassing myself is, a really predominant quality in people that are either in a cult altar or loyal to the cult is they're a narcissist. And a really easy way to look at that is, do the things that they're saying add up to the things that they're doing? The Bible teaches us to look at what is the fruit. And it's very easy for people to come in and you're getting to know them and, you're excited, this person seems great and they're saying all these lovely things and they've got all these solutions and they're offering help. They love to offer help. But is this actually the way this person is conducting themselves? Is it, the truth of the situation of what you're receiving feedback on from other people that know this person, etc.? And it gets easier to spot a narcissist once you've seen these people in action a few times. And one thing I'd point out, which, kind of, I guess, surprised me over the last couple of years, is narcissists are very, very quick, when they don't get their way, to go into complete victim mode. And as survivors, we're empathetic and, we want to help everyone, especially if there are other survivors or other people that are learning about this topic. And, the victim mode and them saying that they desperately need help or they've got a problem or they're being attacked by someone, for example, often makes us switch and look past a lot of behaviors or a lot of truth or a lot of background checks that we should have done to be more safe and know who we're actually dealing with. So, and that's a narcissistic trait. That's pretty much what the person is saying is not adding up to what they're doing. So that might assist some survivors as well, just in terms of like what to look for in terms of a handler or someone coming in that, has these altars still active to the cult, how they might behave in your life. And I'd love to hear if there's anything you'd like to add to that, Krista, with your
Definitely. You triggered a thought about with that comment, and that is, yeah, I have witnessed these individuals switching, like being kind, and then suddenly saying something really out of character, and I turn, I'd be like, what? And in hindsight, looking back, part of it could be narcissistic. Yeah, many of them are, because they were probably brought up by narcissistic parents or parent. And also, a lot of these individuals who are being used are also really, really broken. Most of them that I've encountered have at least one addiction. They either overdrink, they smoke cigarettes, they smoke too much cannabis. Almost all of them have an addiction. So they're really broken, in addition to possibly being having MPD. So there's that. And then the other thing is, at least two of them I was with were boyfriends had homosexual tendencies. I found gay pornography in their homes.
That would have been
What's that?
That would have been a real shock as well.
Yeah. It's, especially when I lived with one of them. So there's that. And the last thing I think I wanted to share was, a lot of them tend to be really great communicators. They can do public presentations, or they're great writers, or great songwriters. They tend to be really great communicators. They may not be, if they are blue collar, they know how to relate to people really well. Like, I met a guy in a grocery store who was way too young for me, but he was flirting with me, and every time I'd see him, he'd just be there and he'd want to talk about, in the beauty section, about like hair lotion or whatever, random stuff. And I swear he was planted there because my stepfather worked in a grocery store. And anyway, it may have been a plan. I didn't give him my phone number, but these people are either great communicators or great connectors. So initially the conversation can just be really natural and really flow. But I remember one time meeting a boyfriend at a restaurant, and he wasn't answering his phone. And I got there and I'm like, what's going on? Why haven't you, he was at the restaurant bar, and he drank too much. And he was definitely a handler. And he turned around and yelled at me. He became Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde, I don't know which. And he yelled at me in a way, it was a side I'd never seen before. And I basically just turned around on my heel of my boot, and I was out the door. I was just like, how dare you talk to, I would never talk to someone, my enemy, like that. So in a public place. So anybody who has the nerve to dress a person down, a male or female partner down, isn't worth our time.
Absolutely. And that really is, having strong boundaries in place, knowing your self-worth, knowing what you deserve, and being able to identify when someone's behaving in a way that is not good enough. Because guaranteed, if you confront a handler on what they're doing, they're not going to say, yeah, that's right, I've been controlling you, I've been causing trouble for you, I've been information gathering on you, I've been stalking you. They're just going to go off. They're going to absolutely flip their lid, go into an altar, completely be a complete narcissist and abuse you further. So, don't bring up that subject with someone and expect them to support what you know is right. And this is such an important part of survivors healing, is starting to really trust your inner guidance, your intuition on people, and trust the boundaries that you've put up. You've put them up for a reason. And if people are disrespecting them, if they're not listening to what you've asked for or your feedback, and you've been very gracious in communicating that to them, it's time to start saying no. And I think no is such a powerful way for us to defend ourselves against survivors, and against handlers. And it is often such a hard thing for survivors to actually say no to someone, because of all the mind control and the abuse. And the trauma has really often put us into that habit of constantly having to be agreeable and having to go along and having to say yes, even to situations that we're clearly getting a lot of feedback on from ourselves that are incorrect, that are dangerous, and that we don't want to be in. So stand your ground. I love hearing that you were able to do that, Krista. Well done.
Thank you. That was before my recovery, but I knew enough to be like, I'm out of here. I want to also add to what you're saying, in terms of survivors having boundaries. Part of it is that a lot of us didn't have healthy relationships or healthy interactions with family. And odds are we had at least one parent with narcissistic personality disorder, NPD. And so I would say if people are looking for healthy relationships and they haven't kind of explored some of the therapists, the psychologists on YouTube and non-psychologists, like a survivor of some kind of trauma. I love her channel. It's called Crappy Childhood Fairy.
Wow.
And she's on YouTube and she talks about PTSD and CPTSD. But I feel like when in doubt, like there's so many talks on NPD and narcissistic personality disorder on YouTube, and do some research. You'll be able to spot it right away once you know what it looks like. There's some great shorts. There are a variety of therapists out there online with great free content because we just didn't have healthy behaviors modeled to us. We really need to take it on and learn for ourselves so we don't get stuck with an unhealthy man or woman.
So true. That's such a great point, Krista. And children model themselves so much on their parents, their primary relationships, their mother and their father. So when the relationship in the inner family is so dysfunctional, it is literally like we have to learn again, what is a healthy relationship? What are healthy boundaries? And how great is it that we can go to a YouTube or a podcast and learn from other survivors or other people that have experienced horrific trauma and neglect in their childhood, learn how they were able to bring in these boundaries and create a safe place around them to heal. And I think that's what it comes down to. If we can put that beautiful boundary around us where we are safe and we constantly can be centered and know who we are, have control of our minds, our bodies and our lives. Once we have that, it becomes a lot easier to identify, when we start getting pulled off center by these handlers and different agendas coming our way as well. So that's such a great point.
Great. And I want to just tack on one last thing to this topic is that some of these individuals like Crappy Childhood Fairy, they talk about, if you have PTSD of any kind, we can move into dysregulation. And how do we get ourselves to a state of re-regulation? And there are some really simple tools online. You can just research dysregulation, re-regulation, what that looks like. Could be box breathing, it could be something else, havening. But those are great things to do when we feel triggered or even just sad, just out of sorts. Because let's face it, right? We've been traumatized enough to where the brain gets stuck on a certain brainwave state or and needs to snap out of it and get into a regulated state to where we're thriving and we're creating healthy relationships and we want to be around people and we don't want to isolate ourselves. Some of that isolation can not only come from wanting to heal, which is great, like God does set us apart for a time, but it shouldn't be for too long. And that could be being grossly dysregulated or in a delta, put to sleep, semi-asleep brainwave state. So knowing what those brainwave states are, knowing what dysregulation looks like and re-regulation, I found really helpful in my healing process.
That's amazing. And I know for myself, like if I'm feeling overwhelmed, triggered, memories are coming up, my safe place is often just being out in nature, grounding on the lawn, on the grounds, and just allowing that our frequencies, our rhythms to go back to something that's natural, because all of the trauma, all of the abuse is such an unnatural frequency, and so often our minds and our bodies can just get stuck in replaying that. So it's so important to be able to, one, like you were saying, Krista, be able to identify when you're going into that state of agitation and just not being yourself, being uncentered, and then having the tools, which there are so many out there that you can turn to now, to be able to bring ourselves back into balance. So I love
Yeah.
that. I love that.
And nature is a great way to re-regulate. I love it too. Yeah.
Absolutely. And how great is it that, that these solutions are things that, are free, they're things that we can do ourselves, they're things that we can do, without the help of a therapist, so you don't have to worry about like information sharing or, possible compromises, or you being targeted or handled in a facility. Like there's so many great things that survivors can do for themselves. And, I love that you're talking about coming back into, finding your own community, because I think that is a big part of healing too. Like firstly, there is a time where you need to, I guess, isolate yourself and put those boundaries up. But once you are secure in yourself, and once are secure in your boundaries, and you know how to reinforce them with people that cross them as well, it's time to come back and, start connecting with people and learning from others. And, we are social beings. And unfortunately, the abuse, through our childhoods has really often disconnected us from, the beauty of what relationships can be. But I know that for so many survivors, as they heal, they're able to have these beautiful friendships and, have beautiful life partners in a way that they were never able to before, because they've been able to open their hearts up again after the abuse. And it's so two sides of a coin, because you can't open your heart up and, love completely without having those really strong boundaries, because otherwise you're going to go back into being victimized by the narcissists that are around as well. So it's definitely, like coming back into nature. It's just finding that balance within and creating that around us as well. So thank you so much for sharing, Krista. Was there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to share before we finish up?
No, I think we're good. Thank you so much for the chat today.
Thank
It
you.
was great.
Thank you so much for sharing about, all of your experiences of handling. I think it's going to be so valuable for other survivors to listen to your experiences as, a survivor that has been very heavily targeted, and reflect on in their lives where this has happened. And, I know with my own healing process, it wasn't until I went through a sufficient amount of healing that I could even really look back in my life and say, oh my God, that person was a handler, that partner was a handler, look at what he did to me, and different memories coming through around that. So, as we heal, we start being able to see a very, very different side of our history and our story. And by knowing that truth, we can create a new way forward. And I commend you for, being so brave and, setting up your own YouTube channel, and I think Rumble channel, where you're sharing like amazing personal experiences and advice for other survivors. And I'll put those links in this video description as well. So survivors listening today that would like to connect with Krista and follow the work that she does, please jump on and support her. I just inspires me so much to see survivors creating solutions and awareness, for other survivors. And I know speaking out can be such a beautiful healing experience after, decades of being silenced. And it's just wonderful to see survivors like you, Krista, out there creating amazing things for our community. So thank you.
Thank you, Gabby. I appreciate the platform and the time.
You are so welcome.